Novel The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini, chapter number 22. Fareed eased the Land Cruiser up the driveway of a big house in Wazir Akbar Khan. He parked in the shadows of willow trees that spilled over the walls of the compound located on the street number 15, Sadke Mehmana, Street of the Guest. He killed the engine and we sat for a minute, listening to the ting-ting of the engine cooling off, neither one of us saying anything. Fareed shifted on his seat and toyed with the keys still hanging from the ignition switch. I could tell he was ready himself to tell me something. "I guess I will wait in the car for you," he said finally, his tone a little apologetic. He would not look at me. "This is your business now." I patted his arm. "You have done much more than I have paid you for. I don't expect you to go with me, but I wish I didn't have to go in alone despite what I had learned about Baba. I wish he were standing alongside me now. Baba would have busted through the front doors and demanded to be taken to the man in charge, piss on the beard of anyone who stood in his way. But Baba was long dead, buried in the Afghan section of a little cemetery in Hayward. Just last month, Suraya and I had placed a bouquet of daisies and freesies beside his headstone. I was on my own. I stepped out of the car and walked to the tall wooden front gates of the house. I rang the bell, but no buzz came. Still no electricity, and I had to pound on the doors. A moment later, I heard terse voices from the other side, and a pair of men trotting Kalashnikovs answered the door. I glanced at Free sitting in the car and mouthed, "I will be back," not so sure at all that I would be. The armed men frisked me head to toe, patted my legs, felt my crotch. One of them said something in Pashto and they both chuckled. We stepped through the front gates. The two guards escorted me across a well-manicured lawn, past a row of geraniums and stubby bushes lined along the wall. An old hand pump water well stood at the far end of the yard. I remembered how Kaka Hamaya's house in Jalalabad had a water well like that. The twins Fazila and Karima and I used to draw pebbles in it, listen for the plink. We climbed a few steps and entered a large, sparsely decorated house. We crossed the foyer. A large Afghan flag draped one of the walls, and the man took me upstairs to the room with the twin mint green sofas and a big screen TV in the far corner. A prayer rug showing a slightly oblong Makkah was nailed to one of the walls. The older of the two men motioned toward the sofa with the barrel of his weapon. I sat down. They left the room. I crossed my legs, uncrossed them, sat with my sweaty hands on my knees. Did that make me look nervous? I clasped them together, decided that was worse, and just crossed my arms on my chest. Blood thudded in my temples. I felt utterly alone. Thoughts were flying around in my head, but I didn't want to think at all because a sober part of me knew that what I had managed to get myself into was insanity. I was thousands of miles from my wife, sitting in a room that felt like a holding cell, waiting for a man I had seen murder two people that same day. It was insanity. Worse yet, it was irresponsible. There was a very realistic chance that I was going to render Suraya a beva, a widow, at the age of 36. "This is not you, Amir," part of me said. "You are gutless. It's how you were made, and that's not such a bad thing because your saving grace is that you have never lied to yourself about it. No, about that. Nothing wrong with cowardice as long as it comes with prudence. But when a coward stops remembering who he is, God help him." There was a coffee table by the sofa. The base was X-shaped, walnut-sized brass balls studding the ring where the metallic legs crossed. I had seen a table like that before. Where? And then it came to me. At the crowded tea shop in Peshawar that night. I had gone for a walk. On the table sat a bowl of red grapes. I plucked one and tossed it in my mouth. I had to preoccupy myself with something, anything to silence the voice in my head. The grape was very sweet. I popped another one in, unaware that it would be the last bite of solid food I would eat for a long time. The door opened and the two armed men returned. Between them, the tall Talib in white, still wearing his dark John Lennon glasses, looking like some broad-shouldered New Age mystic guru. He took a seat across from me and lowered his hands on the armrest for a long time. He said nothing, just sat there watching me, one hand drumming the upholstery, the other twirling turquoise blue prayer beads. He wore a black vest over the white shirt now and a gold watch. I saw a splotch of dried blood on his left sleeve. I found it morbidly fascinating that he hadn't changed clothes after the executions earlier that day. Periodically, his free hand floated up and his thick fingers batted at something in the air. They made slow, stroking motions up and down, side to side, as if he were caressing an invisible pet. One of his sleeves retracted and I saw a mark on his forearm. I had seen those same tracks on homeless people living in grimy alleys in San Francisco. His skin was much paler than the other two men's, almost sallow, and a crop of tiny sweet beads gleamed on his forehead, just below the edge of his black turban. His beard, chest length like the others, was lighter in color too. Salam alaikum, he said. Salam. You can do away with that now, you know, he said. Pardon? He turned his palm to one of the armed men and motioned. Rip. Suddenly my cheeks were stinging and the guard was tossing my beard up and down in his hand, giggling. The Talib grinned. One of the better ones I have seen in a while, but it really is so much better this way, I think. Don't you? He twirled his fingers, snapped them, first opening and closing. So inshallah you enjoyed the show today. Was that what it was? I said, rubbing my cheeks, hoping my voice didn't betray the explosion of terror I felt inside. Public justice is the greatest kind of show, my brother. Drama, suspense, and best of all, education en masse. He snapped his finger. The younger of the two guards lit him a cigarette. The Talib laughed, mumbled to himself. His hands were shaking and he almost dropped the cigarette. But you want to a real show? You should have been with me in Mazar. August 1998 that was. I'm sorry? We left them out for the dogs, you know. I saw that he was getting at. He stood up, paced around the sofa once, twice, sat down again. He spoke repeatedly. Door to door we went, calling for the men and the boys. We could shoot them right there in front of their families. Let them see, let them remember who they were, where they belonged. He was almost panting now. Sometimes we broke down their doors and went inside their homes, and I would sweep the barrel of my machine gun around the room and fire until the smoke blinded me. He leaned toward me like a man about to share a great secret. You don't know the meaning of the word liberating until you have done that. Stood in a room full of targets, let the bullets fly, free of guilt and remorse, knowing you are virtuous, good and decent, knowing you are doing God's work. It's breathtaking. He kissed the prayer beads, tilted his head. You remember that, Javed? Yes, Agha Sahib, the younger of the guards replied. How could I forget? I had read about the Hazara massacre in Mazar-i-Sharif in the papers. It had happened just after the Taliban took over Mazar, one of the last cities to fall. I remember Soraya handing me the article, our breakfast, her face bloodless. Door to door, we only rested for food and prayer, the Talib said. He said it fondly, like a man telling of a great party he had attended. We left the bodies in the street, and if their families tried to sneak out to or drag them back into their homes, we would shoot them too. We left them in the streets for days. We left them for the dogs, dog meat for dogs. He crushed his cigarette, rubbed his eye with tremulous hands. You come from America, yes. How is that war these days? I had a sudden urge to urinate. I prayed it would pass. I am looking for a boy. Isn't for everyone, he said. The man with the Kalashnikovs laughed. Their teeth were stained green with Naswar. I understand he is here with you, I said. His name is Sorab. I will ask you something. What are you doing with that war? Why are not you here with your Muslim brothers, serving your country? I have been away a long time, was all I could think of saying. My head felt so hot. I pressed my knee together, held my bladder. The Talib turned to the two men standing by the door. "That's an answer?" he asked them. "Na, Agha Sahab," they said in unison, smiling. He turned his eyes to me, shrugged. "Not an answer, they say." He took a drag of his cigarette. "There are those in my circle who believe that abandoning Watan when it needs you the most is the same as treason. I could have you arrested for treason. Have you shot for it even? Does that frighten you?" "I am only here for the boy. Does that frighten you?" "Yes, it should," he said. He leaned back in the sofa, crushed the cigarette. "I thought about Soraya. It calmed me. I thought of her sickle-shaped birthmark, the elegant curve of her neck, her luminous eyes. I thought of our wedding night, gazing each other's reflection in the mirror under the green veil, and how her cheeks blushed when I whispered that I loved her. I remembered the two of us dancing to an old Afghan song, round and round, everyone watching and clapping, the world a blur of flowers, dresses, tuxedos and smiling faces. The Talib was saying something. "Pardon," I said. "Would you like to see him? Would you like to see my boy?" His upper lip curled up in a sneer when he said those last two words. "Yes." The guard left the room. I heard the creak of a door swinging open. I heard the guard say something in Pashto in a hard voice, then footfalls and the jingle of bells with each step. I reminded me of the monkey man Hassan and I used to chase down in Sharai. Now we used to pay him a rupiah of our allowance for a dance. The bell around his monkey's neck had made that same jingling sound. Then the door opened and the guard walked in. He carried a stereo, a boom box on his shoulder. Behind him, a boy dressed in a loose sapphire blue Pirhan Tumban followed. The resemblance was breathtaking, disorienting. Rahim Khan's Polaroid hadn't done justice to it. The boy had his father's round moon face, his pointy stub of a chin, his twisted seashell ears, and the same slight frame. It was the Chinese doll face of my childhood, the face peering above, fanned out, playing cards all those winter days, the face behind the mosquito net when we slept on the roof of my father's house in the summer. His head was shaved, his eyes darkened with mascara, and his cheeks glowed with an unnatural red. When he stopped in the middle of the room, the bells strapped around his collets stopped jingling. His eyes fell on me, lingered, then he looked away, looked down at his naked feet. One of the guards pressed a button and Pashto music filled the room. Tabla, harmonium, the one of a Dilruba. I guess music was not sinful as long as it played to Taliban ears. The three men began to clap. "Wah wah, mashallah," they cheered. Sorab raised his arms and turned slowly. He stood on tiptoes, spun gracefully, dipped to his knee, straightened and spun again. His little hands swiveled at the wrist, his fingers snapped and his head swung side to side like a pendulum. His feet pounded the floor, the bells jingling in perfect harmony with the beat of the tabla. He kept his eyes closed. "Mashallah," they cheered. "Shabash, bravo." The two guards whistled and laughed. The Talib in white was tilting his head back and forth with the music, his mouth half open in a leer. Sorab danced in a circle, eyes closed, danced until the music stopped. The bell jingled one final time. When he stomped his foot with the song's last note, he froze in mid-spin. "Bia, Bia, my boy," the Talib said, calling Sorab to him. Sorab went to him head down, stood between the thighs. The Talib wrapped his arms around the boy. "How talented he is, na, my Hazara boy," he said. His hand slid down the child's back, then up, felt under his armpit. One of the guards elbowed the other and snickered. The Talib told them to leave us alone. "Agha Sahib," they said as they exited. The Talib spun the boy around so he faced me. He locked his arms around Sorab's belly, rested his chin on the boy's shoulder. Sorab looked down at his feet but kept stealing shy. Furtive glances at me. The man's hand slid up and down the boy's belly, up and down, slowly, gently. "I have been wondering," the Talib said, his bloodshot eyes peering at me over Sorab's shoulder. "Whatever happened to old Babalu anyway?" The question hit me like a hammer between the eyes. I felt the color drain from my face. My legs went cold, numb. He laughed. "What did you think? That's you would put on a fake beard and I would not recognize you. Here's something I will bet you never knew about me. I never forget a face, not ever. He brushed his lips against Saurabh's ear, kept his eye on me. I heard your father died. I always did want to take him on. Looks like I will have to settle for his weakling of a son. Then he took off his sunglasses and looked his bloodshot blue eyes on mine. I tried to take a breath and I couldn't. I tried to blink and couldn't. The moment felt surreal. No, not surreal, absurd. It had knocked the breath out of me, brought the world around me to stand still. My face was burning. What was the old saying about the bad penny? My past was like that, always turning up. His name rose from the deep, and I didn't want to say it, as if uttering it might conjure him. But he was already here in the flesh, sitting less than 10 feet from me. After all these years, his name escaped my lips. Asif, Amir Jan. What are you doing here? I said, knowing how utterly foolish the question sounded, yet unable to think of anything else to say. Me. Asif arched an eyebrow. I am in my element. The question is, what are you doing here? I already told you, I said. My voice was trembling. I wished it would not do that. Wish my flesh wasn't shrinking against my bones. The boy. Yes, why? I will pay you for him, I said. I can have money wired. Money? Asif said, teetered. Have you ever heard of Rockingham? Western Australia, slice of heaven. You should see it. Miles and miles of beach. Green water, blue skies. My parents live there in a beachfront villa. There's a golf course behind the villa and a little lake. Father plays golf every day. Mother, she prefers tennis. Father says she has a wicked backhand. They own an Afghan restaurant and 2 jewelry stores. Both businesses are doing spectacularly. He plucked a red grape, but it lovingly in Saurabh's mouth. So if I need money, I will have them wire it to me. He kissed the side of Saurabh's neck. The boy flinched a little, closed his eyes again. Besides, I didn't fight the Shoravi for money, didn't join the Taliban for money either. Do you want to know why I joined them? My lips had gone dry. I licked them and found my tongue had dried too. Are you thirsty? Asif said, smirking. I think you are thirsty. I am fine. I said. The truth was the room felt too hot suddenly. Sweat was bursting from my pores, prickling my skin. And was this really happening? Was I really sitting across from Asif? As you wish, he said. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, I joined the Taliban. Well, as you may remember, I was not much of religious type, but one day I had a epiphany. I had it in jail. Do you want to hear? I said nothing. Good, I will tell you, he said. I spent some time in jail at Polecharkhi. Just after Babri Karmal took over in 1980, I ended up there one night when a group of Parchami soldiers marched into our house and ordered my father and me at gunpoint to follow them. The bastards didn't give a reason and they would not answer my mother's question. No, Dad, it was a mystery. Everyone knew the communists had no class. They came from poor families with no name. The same dogs who were not fit to lick my shoes before the Shoravi came were now ordering me at gunpoint. Parchami flag on their lapels, making their little point about the fall of the bourgeois and acting like they were the ones with class. It was happening all over round up. The rich threw them in a jail, make an example for the comrades. Anyway, we were crammed in groups of 6, these tiny cells, each the size of the refrigerator. Every night the commandant, a half Hazara, half Uzbek thing who smelled like a rotting donkey, would have one of the prisoners dragged out of the cell and he could beat him until sweat poured from his fat face. Then he could light a cigarette, crack his joint and leave. The next night he would pick someone else. One night he picked me. It couldn't have come at a worse time. I had been peeing blood for the 3 days, kidney stones, and if you have never had one, believe me when I say it's the worst imaginable pain. My mother used to get them too, and I remember she told me once she would rather give birth than pass a kidney stone. Anyway, what could I do? They dragged me out and he started kicking me. He had knee-high boots with steel toes that he wore every night for his little kicking game and he used them on me. I was screaming and kept kicking me, and then suddenly he kicked me on the left kidney and the stone pass, just like that. Oh, the relief. Asif laughed and I yelled Allahu Akbar, and he kicked me even harder and I started laughing. He got mad and hit me harder, and the harder he kicked me, the harder I laughed. They threw me back in the cell laughing. I kept laughing because suddenly I knew that had been a message from God. He was on my side. He wanted me to live for a reason. I ran into the commandant on the battlefield a few years later. Funny how God works. I found him in trench just outside Mimana, bleeding from a piece of shrapnel in his chest. He was still wearing those same boots. I asked him if he remembered me. He said no. I told him the same thing I just told you, that I never forget a face. Then I shot him in the balls. I have been on a mission since. What mission is that? I heard myself say. Stoning adulterers, raping children, flogging women for wearing high heels, massacring Hazaras, all in the name of Islam. The world spilled suddenly and unexpectedly came out before I could yank the leash. I wish I could take them back, swallow them, but they were out. I had crossed a line, and whatever little hope I had of getting out alive had vanished with those words. A look of surprise passed across Asif's face briefly and disappeared. I see this may turn out to be enjoyable after all, he said, snickering, but there are things traitors like you don't understand. Like what? Asif bro twitched. Like pride in your people, your customs, your language. Afghanistan is like a beautiful mansion littered with garbage, and someone has to take out the garbage. That's what you were doing in Mazar, going door to door, taking out the garbage. Precisely. In the West, they have an expression for that. I said they call it ethnic cleansing. Do they? Asif's face brightened. Ethnic cleansing, I like it. I like the sound of it. All I want is the boy. Ethnic cleansing, Asif murmured, testing the words. I want the boy. I said again. Sorab's eyes flicked to me. They were slaughtered sheep's eyes. They even had the mascara. I remember how on the day of Eid of Qurban, the mullah in our backyard used to apply mascara to the eyes of sheep and feed it a cube of sugar before slicing its throat. I thought I saw pleading in Sorab's eyes. Tell me why, Asif said. He pinched Sorab's earlobe between his teeth. Let's go. Sweet beads rolled down his brow. That's my business. What do you want to do with him? He said. Then a coy smile or to him. That's disgusting, I said. How would you know? Have you tried it? I want to take him to better place. Tell me why. That's my business, I said. I didn't know what had emboldened me to be so curt. Maybe the fact that I thought I was going to die anyway. I wonder, Asif said, I wonder why you have come all this way, Amir. Come all this way for Hazara. Why are you here? Why are you really here? I have my reasons, I said. Very well then, Asif said, sneering. He shoved Sorab in the bag, pushed him right into the table. Sorab's hip struck the table, knocking it upside down and spilling the grapes. He fell on them face first and stained his shirt purple with grape juice. The table's leg crossing through the ring of brass balls were now pointing to the ceiling. Take him then, Asif said. I helped Sorab to his feet, sweated the bits of crushed grape that had stuck to his pants like barnacles to a pier. Go take him, Asif said, pointing to the door. I took Sorab's hand. It was small, the skin dry and calloused. His fingers moved, laced themselves with mine. I saw Sorab in that Polaroid again, the way his arm was wrapped around Hassan's leg, his head resting against his father's hip. They had both been smiling. The bells jingled as we crossed the room. We made it as far as the door. Of course, Asif said behind us. I didn't say you could take him for free. I turned. What do you want? You have to earn him. What do you want? We have some unfinished business, you and I, Asif said. You remember, don't you? He need not have worried. I would never forget the day after Daud Khan overthrew the king. My entire adult life, whenever I heard Daud Khan's names, what I saw was Hassan with his slingshot pointed at Asif's face. Hassan saying that they would have to start calling him One-Eyed Asif instead of Asif Goshkhor. I remember how envious I had been of Hassan's bravery. Asif had back backed down, promised that in the end he would get us both. He had kept that promise with Hassan. Now it was my turn. All right, I said, not knowing what else there was to say. I was not about to beg. That would have only sweetened the moment for him. Asif called the guards back into the room. I want you to listen to me, he said to them. In a moment I am going to close the door. Then he and I are going to finish an old bit of business. No matter what you hear, don't come in. Do you hear me? Don't come in. The guards nodded, looked from Asif to me. Yes, Aga Sahib, when it's all done, only one of us will walk out of this room alive. Asif said, if it's him, then he earned his freedom and you let him pass. Do you understand? The older guard shifted on his feet. But Aga Sahib, if it's him, you let him pass, Asif screamed. The two men flinched but nodded again. They turned to go. One of them reached for Sarab. Let him stay, Asif said. He grinned. Let him watch. Lessons are good things for boys. The guards left. Asif put down his prayer beads, reached in the breast pocket of his black vest. What he fished out of the pocket didn't surprise me one bit. Stainless steel brass knuckles. He has gel in his hair and a Clark Gable mustache above his thick lips. The gel has soaked through the green paper surgical cap, made a dark stain the shape of Africa. I remember that about him, that and the gold Allah chain around his dark neck. He is peering down at me, speaking repeatedly in a language I don't understand. Urdu, I think. My eyes keep going to his Adam's apple bobbing up and down, and I want to ask him how old he is anyway. He looks far too young, like an actor from some foreign soap opera. But all I can mutter is, I think I gave him a good fight. I don't know if I gave Asif a good fight. I don't think I did. How could I have? That was the first time I had fought anyone. I had never so much as thrown a punch in my entire life. My memory of the fight with Asif is amazingly vivid in stretches. I remember Asif turning on the music before slipping on his brass knuckles. The prayer rug, the one with the oblong woven makkah, came loose from the wall at one point and landed on my head. The dust from it made me sneeze. I remember Asif showing grapes in my face, his snarled, all spit, shining teeth, his bloodshot eye rolling. His turban fell at some point, let loose curls of shoulder-length blonde hair. And at the end, of course, that I still see with perfect clarity. I always will. Mostly I remember his brass knuckles flashing in the afternoon light, how cold they felt with the first few blows and how quickly they warmed with my blood. Getting thrown against the wall, a nail where a framed picture may have hung once, jabbing at my back. Sorab screaming, tabla harmonium, a Dilruba getting hurled against the wall, the knuckles shattering my jaw, choking on my own teeth, swallowing them, thinking about all the countless hours I had spent flossing and brushing, getting hurled against the wall, laying on the floor, blood from my split upper lip staining the mauve carpet, pain ripping through my belly, and wondering then I would be able to breathe again. The sound of my ribs snapping like the tree branches Hassan and I used to break to sword fight like Sinbad in those old movies. Sorab screaming, the side of my face slamming against the corner of the television stand, that snapping sound again, this time just under my left eye. Music, Sorab screaming, fingers grasping my hair, pulling my head back. The twinkle of a stainless steel, here they come. That snapping sound yet again. Now my nose biting down in a pain, noticing how my teeth didn't align like they used to. Getting kicked, Sorab screaming. I don't know at what point I started laughing, but I did. It hurt to laugh, hurt my jaws, my ribs, my throat, but I was laughing, and the harder I laughed, the harder he kicked me, punched me, scratched me. What's so funny? Asif kept roaring with each blow. His spittle landed in my eye. Sorab screamed. What's so funny? Asif bellowed. Another rib snapped, this time left lower. What was so funny was that for the first time since the winter of 1975, I felt at peace. I laughed because I saw that in some hidden nook in a corner of my mind. I had even been looking forward to this. I remembered the day on the hill I had pelted Hassan with pomegranates and the try to provoke him. He had just stood there doing nothing, red juice soaking through his shirt like blood. Then he had taken the pomegranate from my hand, crushed it against his forehead. Are you satisfied now? He had hissed. Do you feel better? I had not been happy and I had not felt better, not at all, but I did now. My body was broken just how badly. I would not find out until later, but I felt healed. Healed at last, I laughed. Then the and that's I will take to my grave. I was on the ground laughing, Asif straddling my chest, his face a mask of lunacy framed by snarls of his hair swaying inches from my face. His free hand was locked around my throat, the other the one with the brass knuckles cocked above his shoulder. He raised his fist higher, raised it for another blow. Then Buzz, a thin voice. We both looked. Please no more. I remembered something the orphanage director had said when he had opened the door to me and Farid. What had been his name? Zawan. He's inseparable from that thing, he had said. He tucks it in the waist of his pants everywhere he goes. No more. Twin trails of black mascara mixed with tears had rolled down his cheeks, smeared the roach. His lower lip trembled. Mucus seeped from his nose, but he croaked. His hand was cocked above his shoulder, holding the cup of the slingshot at the end of the elastic band, which was pulled all the way back. There was something in the cup, something shiny and yellow. I blinked the blood from my eyes and saw it was one of the brass balls from the ring in the table base. Sorab had the slingshot pointed to Asif's face. No more, Agha, please, he said, his voice husky and trembling. Stop hurting him. Asif's mouth moved wordlessly. He began to say something, stopped. What do you think you doing? He finally said. Please stop, Sorab said, fresh tears pooling in his green eyes mixing with mascara. Put it down, Hazara, Asif hissed. Put it down or what I am doing to him will be gentle, ear-twisting compared to what I will do to you. The tears broke free. Sorab shook his head. Please, Agha, he said, stop. Put it down. Don't hurt him anymore. Put it down. Please put it down. Put it down. Asif let go of my throat, lunged at Sorab. The slingshot made a twit sound when Sorab released the cup. Then Asif was screaming. He put his hand where his left eye had been just a moment ago. Blood oozed between his fingers. Blood and something else. Something white and gel-like. That's called vitreous fluid. I thought with clarity. I have read that somewhere. Vitreous fluid. Asif rolled on the carpet, rolled side to side, shrieking, his hand still cupped over the bloody socket. Let's go, Sorab said. He took my hand. He helped me to my feet. Every inch of my battered body wailed with pain. Behind us, Asif kept shrieking. Out! Get it out! He screamed. Tittering, I opened the door. The guards' eyes widened. Then they saw me and I wondered what I looked like. My stomach hurt with each breath. One of the guards said something in Pashto and then they blew past us, running into the room where Asif was still screaming out. Bia, Sorab said, pulling my hand. Let's go. I stumbled down the hallway, Sorab's little hand in mine. I took a final look over my shoulder. The guards were huddled over Asif, doing something to his face. Then I understood the brass ball was still stuck in his empty eye socket. The whole world rocking up and down, swooping side to side. I hobbled down to the steps, leaning on Sorab from above. Asif's screams went on and on, the cries of a wounded animal. We made it outside into the daylight, my arm around Sorab's shoulder, and I saw Farid running towards us. Bismillah, Bismillah, he said, eyes bulging at the sight of me. He slung my arm around his shoulder and lifted me, carried me to the truck. Running, I think I screamed. I watched the way his sandals pounded the pavement, slapped his black calloused heels. It hurt to breath. Then I was looking up at the roof of the Land Cruiser in the back seat, the upholstery beige and ripped, listening to the ding 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 dings signaling an open door, running footstep around the truck, Farid and Sorab exchanging quick words. The truck's door slammed shut and the engine roared to life. The car jerked forward and I felt a tiny hand on my forehead. I heard voices on the street, some shouting, and saw trees blurring past in the window. Sorab was sobbing. Farid was still repeating Bismillah, Bismillah. It was about then that I passed out.